All right, so today we're diving into the early outlaw years of Jesse James,
Yeah,
and you got some really interesting historical accounts to work with here.
definitely some fascinating stuff to dig into.
Yeah, so I guess our mission here is to really try to understand, what were the forces at play that shaped his path.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
I think we're going beyond just the bank robberies and really trying to understand the world that he came from.
Right, like the broader historical context.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's set the stage here.
Yes.
So it's 1863, the Civil War is raging. Missouri is in a really volatile state under Union occupation, but also with this fierce resistance from Confederate guerrilla fighters, these bushwhackers.
Yeah, Missouri is really a microcosm of the entire war, just this brutal internal conflict.
Yeah, it's really neighbor against neighbor stuff, right?
Exactly. And what really strikes me when you look at this period is how intensely personal the war was in Missouri.
Right?
It wasn't just distant armies. It was communities, families being torn apart. And these bushwhackers, while they were viewed as ruthless, by Unionists, they were seen as heroes by many Southern sympathizers.
Right.
And that's really important to understand Jesse's world.
Totally. And so into this incredibly violent and polarized environment steps a 16-year-old Jesse James
16 years old.
joining the Bushwhackers. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just wild to think about.
It's hard to even imagine that level of violence and ideological fervor, at such a young age.
Yeah, just to be surrounded by that.
Right, and it really highlights the radicalizing power of war, especially in these border states like Missouri.
For sure.
For someone like Jesse, witnessing this brutality firsthand, possibly experiencing loss himself,
Yeah.
joining the Bushwhackers probably felt like a necessary act of survival.
Right. Or even retaliation.
Exactly.
So the war ends, but as we see in the sources, the unrest in Missouri, it doesn't just go away.
No, not at all.
There's this deep-seated bitterness among former Confederates who now feel like they're living under this oppressive regime.
Right. This is the reality that Jesse and his brother Frank faced. And they just couldn't accept this new order.
Right. And if we connect this to broader historical patterns, this is something you see pretty often, right?
Oh, absolutely. This post-conflict resistance to imposed authority.
Right.
For those who fought so intensely on one side, reintegration is incredibly challenging,
Yeah.
especially if they feel like their entire way of life has been unjustly destroyed.
Right. And so understanding this context of this deeply fractured society is so crucial because it directly shapes the motivations behind Jesse and Frank's initial forays into crime.
Yeah, their first steps towards becoming outlaws.
Right. It's a series of small bank robberies across Missouri.
They weren't yet the headline-grabbing events that would later make them famous, more localized acts of defiance.
Yeah, and as you might expect, some within those local communities, particularly those sympathetic to the Confederate cause, they probably didn't see these robberies as, just pure criminality.
Right. They likely viewed them as further acts of rebellion against the Union establishment.
Yeah, a continuation of the fight in a way.
Exactly.
But then the narrative shifts significantly around 1869.
This is when things start to escalate.
Yeah, it takes a much darker turn. Jesse and Frank target the workplace of Samuel Cox, the man who had killed their former guerrilla leader.
This suggests a shift in motivation.
Yeah, it's not just about money anymore. It's personal. It's revenge.
Right. It raises the question, was it solely about settling a score, or was it still intertwined with that resistance to the post-war order?
It's probably a mix of both, right?
Yeah, most likely a complex interplay of motivations.
And this is where things become truly pivotal during this robbery. Jesse mistakenly shoots and kills a bank clerk, believing him to be Cox.
A tragic case of mistaken identity with huge consequences.
And it really marks a turning point, right? Because up to this point, their actions, they were targeted robberies. They had this political undertone to them.
Right. But the killing of an innocent civilian?
Yeah, that changes things.
It moves them into the realm of outright violence against the general public, and it fundamentally alters their image.
And it brings them to the attention of John Newman Edwards, the editor of the Kansas City Times, a staunch Confederate sympathizer.
Yeah, Edwards is a fascinating character. He sees an opportunity in this tragedy.
Right. He's a master storyteller, and he starts to craft this narrative that portrays Jesse James not as a common criminal, but as this, heroic figure of resistance against this illegitimate authority.
And he has this powerful platform to spread that narrative.
Right. And so as we wrap up this deep dive into Jesse James's early years, it really makes you think about the impact of this single horrific mistake, the shooting of that bank clerk.
Yeah.
And how the media narrative that was amplified by someone like Edwards could have been the catalyst that transformed a local criminal into this legendary outlaw figure.
It's a powerful example of how perception and storytelling can shape history.
Absolutely. And I think it leaves us with a lot to consider, as we go forward exploring Jesse James's life and legacy.
Great.
So for our listeners out there, think about this, considering everything we've discussed, how much did this one tragic error and the resulting portrayal in the press really shape the transformation of Jesse James into the almost mythical outlaw we still remember today?
It's a question worth pondering.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.